Single mom drops baby photo on flight. The CEO freezes and says, "You were never going to tell me." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The airplane hummed softly through the night sky, a dim glow of cabin lights washing over rows of tired passengers. Emily Parker shifted in her narrow seat, cradling her sleeping baby in her arms. The red-eye flight from Dallas to New York had been delayed for 3 hours, and exhaustion had carved deep shadows beneath her eyes. She adjusted the thin blanket over her son, her hands trembling from fatigue and the heavy ache of worry that never seemed to leave. A businessman beside her sighed quietly, turning the pages of a document on his tablet. His suit was immaculate, even after hours of travel, his silver watch gleaming faintly under the cabin light. Emily caught a glimpse of the engraved initials on the metal band, but quickly looked away, embarrassed to even exist in the same row as someone who looked that powerful. Her baby stirred, and she rocked him gently, whispering, "It is okay, sweetheart. Mommy is here." The man beside her looked up briefly, his eyes softening for a second before returning to his screen. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, jolting slightly. Emily's worn diaper bag slid from under the seat and spilled open. Diapers, a bottle, and a small photograph fluttered onto the aisle floor. She gasped, bending quickly to gather them before anyone noticed. But the photo had already landed near the man's polished shoes. He picked it up, intending to hand it back without much thought, until he saw the image. The baby in the photo, maybe 6 months old, looked almost identical to a child he once dreamed of having. The tiny dimple, the same grey-blue eyes, the faint curl of dark hair. His chest tightened as recognition hit him like cold water. Emily froze when she saw his expression change. His eyes, once distant, were now locked on the picture as if the world around them had stopped moving. "This is your baby?" he asked quietly, voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. "Yes," Emily whispered, her throat tight. "I am sorry. It fell out of my bag." She reached for the photo, but he did not immediately let go. His gaze flicked between her face and the image again, his voice unsteady. "What is his name?" "Noah," she said, clutching the strap of her bag, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. The man blinked, the name slicing through the walls he had built around his memory. He looked away for a moment, swallowing hard, then handed the picture back. "Beautiful name," he murmured, though his tone had shifted. Something old and unresolved flickered behind his calm exterior. Emily forced a polite smile and tucked the photo away, hoping the moment would dissolve like the rest of her life's awkward encounters. But he kept glancing at her, his jaw tightening with questions he could not yet ask. The cabin lights dimmed for landing, casting their faces in half-shadow. Outside the window, dawn began to break, soft and cold over the clouds. Emily closed her eyes, unaware that the stranger beside her was staring at her with a silent storm in his chest, the kind that only comes when fate decides the truth can no longer stay hidden. The landing gear touched down with a low rumble, and the cabin filled with the familiar mechanical whine as the plane slowed on the runway. Emily blinked herself awake, startled by the sudden jolt. Her baby stirred against her shoulder but did not cry. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for small mercies. The man beside her had been silent since the photograph incident, his posture stiff, his gaze distant. He had not looked at his tablet again, nor had he spoken. Yet the air between them felt charged with unspoken questions. When the seatbelt sign went off, passengers began to stand, stretching and gathering their belongings. Emily fumbled with the diaper bag, desperate to leave before things grew awkward. Her hand brushed against the folded photograph again, and she shoved it deeper inside. The man finally spoke, his voice calm but lower now, like he was speaking to himself as much as to her. "How old is your son?" She hesitated, clutching Noah closer. "He just turned 6 months." He nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on the baby's tiny hand resting against her arm. "You are traveling alone?" Emily swallowed, unsure how much to reveal. "Yes. I was visiting my sister in Dallas. We are heading home now." "New York?" "Brooklyn," she said quickly, forcing a polite smile. "I am sure you have somewhere important to be. Thank you for helping me earlier." Before he could respond, she stepped into the aisle, rocking Noah gently as she made her way toward the exit. He watched her leave, jaw tight, as if afraid that if he blinked, she would disappear forever. When his driver met him outside the terminal, he barely acknowledged the greeting. His mind was elsewhere, on the baby's dimpled smile and the haunting familiarity in Emily's eyes. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," the driver said. "Should I take you straight to the office?" "Yes," he replied absently, staring out the window as the car pulled away from the terminal. Alexander Carter, CEO of Meridian Technologies, a man known for precision and composure, could not focus on anything except that photograph. The baby looked too much like him at that age, like the face from an old family album his mother used to keep by the piano. The thought unsettled him. Across the city, Emily stood at the baggage claim, rocking Noah and glancing nervously at the people around her. She felt exposed, like every stranger could see the weight of secrets she carried. Once she had her suitcase, she stepped into the morning chill outside the airport and called a cab. By the time she reached her small apartment in Brooklyn, Noah was asleep again, his soft breaths steady against her chest. She laid him gently in his crib and sank onto the couch, her mind still replaying the look on the man's face when he saw the photo. She had not meant for him to notice it. It had been years since she had last seen Alexander, years since that brief, impossible moment when their worlds had collided. She had told herself he would never remember her, never know about Noah. She thought she had buried that chapter forever. But fate had its own cruel timing. Meanwhile, at Meridian Tower, Alexander's assistant, Claire, found him staring out the glass wall of his office. "Sir, the board meeting starts in 20 minutes, she reminded gently. He did not turn. "Reschedule it. I need to check something first." His tone left no room for argument. Claire blinked but nodded. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he reached one labeled James Connors, HR. "James," he said when the man answered, "I need you to look up a former accounting intern named Emily Parker. She worked here about 2 years ago, I think. Quiet, brown hair, small-town background. Find her file and send it to me immediately." "Of course, sir," James replied. "Is there an issue?" "Just curiosity," Alexander said softly, ending the call. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Somewhere between his ambition and his loneliness, he had lost track of what made him human. And now, one wrong flight, one fallen photograph, had shaken it all loose. Back in Brooklyn, Emily stood by Noah's crib, running her fingers over his soft hair. "It is okay," she whispered. "No one will ever take you away from me." Her voice broke slightly, the fear she had buried for months rising again. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, and the city began to wake, unaware that somewhere above it, 2 lives that should never have crossed paths again were already being pulled back together by something stronger than either of them could resist. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of Meridian Tower, but Alexander Carter barely noticed. His assistant slipped a folder onto his desk. "You asked for this, sir. Emily Parker. She was an accounting intern about 2.5 years ago. Quiet record, no misconduct. She left abruptly before her internship ended." Alexander opened the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. The photo attached to her HR form was unmistakable. The same tired, yet resilient eyes. The same quiet strength he had seen on the plane. Beneath the photo, a note caught his attention. "Resigned due to family emergency. No forwarding address provided." He sat back in his chair, his heartbeat uneven. He remembered now. 2 years ago, during a merger project, an intern had accidentally spilled coffee on him. He had been furious at first, but her trembling apology and earnest effort to fix the mistake had softened him. He remembered how she had worked late nights, reconciling numbers no one else wanted to touch. She had asked for a week off afterward, then never returned. He had assumed she had found another job. Now, with the image of her baby's face burned into his mind, that assumption felt hollow. He picked up his phone and called Claire. "Find me her current address," he said quietly. "Do not involve HR further. Handle it personally." Meanwhile, across Brooklyn, Emily walked quickly through the narrow aisles of a local grocery store. Her hoodie was pulled up, her diaper bag slung over one shoulder. Noah was with a neighbor, and for the first time in days, she had a moment alone. But solitude did not feel peaceful, it felt like guilt. She could still see Alexander's expression from the flight. The shock, the suspicion, the question that had hovered unsaid between them. She thought she had buried that past. She had promised herself that Noah would never grow up with the same emptiness she had known, waiting for a father who would never come. As she reached for a carton of milk, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello? Emily Parker," a female voice asked. "This is Claire from Meridian Technologies. I am calling on behalf of Mr. Carter." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. "I think you have the wrong number," Emily said quickly, her throat dry. "No, ma'am. Mr. Carter asked if he could speak with you. He said it is regarding an old internship file. He would like to meet in person." "I do not work there anymore," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Please tell him I appreciate the offer, but I am not available." She hung up before the woman could reply. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped her phone. She abandoned her basket and hurried out into the cold air. She needed to disappear again. But Alexander was not the kind of man who gave up. That evening, as Emily rocked Noah to sleep, headlights flashed outside her apartment window. She froze. The sound of a car door closing echoed through the quiet street. A knock followed, steady, polite, but firm. She stepped toward the door, heart pounding, then stopped. Another knock. "Emily," came a familiar voice from the other side. Deep, controlled, patient. "It is Alexander." She pressed her back against the wall, breathing shallowly. How had he found her so quickly? "I just want to talk," he said softly. "Please open the door." She stayed silent, staring at the sleeping baby in the crib. Alexander exhaled, the sound faint through the thin wood. "You do not have to be afraid. I only want to understand." His words carried something she had not expected, gentleness. After a long pause, his footsteps retreated. Through the curtain, she saw him stand beside a black sedan, hands in his pockets, watching her window for a few seconds before getting into the car. When the tail lights faded down the street, Emily's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, tears slipping down her cheeks. She knew this was not over. Fate had already decided that their paths would cross again, and next time, she would not be able to hide behind silence. Across town, Alexander sat in the back seat, his reflection blurred in the city lights. "She is terrified of me," he murmured. "Maybe she has a reason," his driver replied quietly. Alexander said nothing. He only stared out into the darkness, his mind circling the same question that had haunted him since that flight. What kind of man had he been, that the truth had to hide from him? The next morning, Emily woke to the soft cooing of her baby. Noah reached up with his small hands, touching her face as sunlight spilled through the thin curtains. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. The night before had felt like a dream, or maybe a warning. She had convinced herself that Alexander would let it go, but deep down, she knew better. Men like him never stopped searching once they found a question that bothered them. Across the city, Alexander sat at his breakfast table, untouched coffee cooling beside him. His phone buzzed with messages from his board, but he ignored them. His mind was on the woman behind that door. He could still see her frightened eyes, the way she shielded her child, like someone preparing to lose everything again. That image cut deeper than any business failure ever could. "You have not eaten," his housekeeper said gently. "I am not hungry," he replied. She hesitated. "Then maybe you should talk to whoever she is. Sometimes the truth is easier than what we imagine." He looked up, surprised by her insight, then gave a faint smile. "Maybe you are right." By noon, he was back at his office, scrolling through old records again. There was something odd in Emily's file, an emergency contact listed years ago, an older woman named Margaret Hill in Queens. He made a call. The voice that answered was kind but cautious. Margaret Hill speaking. "Mrs. Hill, my name is Alexander Carter. I am trying to reach Emily Parker. I believe you know her." A pause followed, long enough to tell him she was thinking carefully before replying. "Emily used to rent my basement apartment when she was pregnant. She left about 6 months after the baby was born. Why are you asking, Mr. Carter?" "I just need to make sure she is all right," he said honestly. She seemed scared. "That girl has had reasons to be," Margaret said softly. "Life has not been gentle with her. If you care about her, do not push too hard." The line went quiet. Alexander closed his eyes, the weight of guilt pressing down. He had been cruel once without realizing it. 2 years ago, during the merger chaos, he had ended her internship abruptly after learning of her pregnancy, thinking she had broken company policy. He had not even asked her side of the story. He had simply signed the termination letter, believing it was the responsible choice. Now that memory made him sick. Meanwhile, Emily walked along a narrow Brooklyn street with Noah bundled against her chest. The wind was sharp, and she pulled her coat tighter, whispering softly to him about the colors of autumn leaves. She tried to keep her voice light, as if she could will away the anxiety clinging to her like a shadow. She stopped by a small park bench, sitting down to rest. An elderly woman nearby smiled at the baby. "Beautiful boy," she said. "He has your eyes." Emily forced a smile. "Thank you." Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Her stomach turned. She answered cautiously. "Emily," came Alexander's voice. "Calm. Steady. Please do not hang up. I will not come to your home again. I just want to talk." "There is nothing to talk about," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Then let me say one thing," he continued. "I owe you an apology. Years ago, when you were working for me, I signed off on your termination without asking why. That was wrong. I did not know you were expecting." Emily closed her eyes, tears burning behind her lids. "It does not matter anymore. It matters to me," he said firmly. "If I had known, I would have helped. You deserved better." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of traffic. "Why now?" she finally asked. "Why do you care?" His voice softened. "Because when I saw your son, I saw a mistake I might have made twice." Emily could not find words. She ended the call before her emotions betrayed her. As she looked down at Noah, his tiny fingers clutching her sleeve, she whispered, "We will be okay." But even as she said it, her heart ached with uncertainty. Across town, Alexander placed his phone down, his reflection cold in the dark window. He knew she would not trust him easily. Still, something inside him whispered that fate was not finished with them yet. Some truths demanded to be seen, no matter how long they had been hidden. Rain drizzled softly against the windows of the small apartment as evening settled over Brooklyn. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, its black screen reflecting the faint light of the lamp. She had not blocked Alexander's number, though she had told herself she should. Something about his voice earlier that day had sounded different, not cold or powerful, but human. Still, she could not afford to believe in sincerity, not from a man like him. Noah babbled from his high chair, smearing bits of mashed banana across his tray. Emily smiled faintly, wiping his face with a napkin. "You are the only man I trust," she whispered. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a kiss to his forehead. She thought about the past, about the day she found out she was pregnant, alone, frightened, and unsure how to tell the man who had already dismissed her from his company without a glance. She had written him an email once, fingers trembling over the keyboard, but she had deleted it before hitting send. There had been no point. To him, she was just a mistake on paper, a name in an HR file, or so she had thought. Across the East River, Alexander stared out from his penthouse office, the city lights blurring into a haze. He could not shake the image of that baby's eyes, his own eyes. The timeline lined up too neatly to ignore. 2 years ago, Emily had disappeared. 6 months later, she had a child. His hands clenched into fists on the desk. He did not know if he was angry or terrified. Claire entered quietly, placing a folder down. "Sir, this might help. I had a contact in payroll pull archived maternity insurance files from that year. Emily Parker applied for temporary medical leave, but it was denied because her internship had ended early." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Denied," he repeated softly, as if the word itself were an accusation. He rubbed his temple. "Claire, if you were in her position, what would you think of me?" Claire hesitated. "Honestly, sir, I would think you never cared." He nodded slowly, pain flickering across his face. "Then maybe it is time to change that." Later that night, Emily rocked Noah to sleep, humming softly under her breath. The room smelled faintly of baby lotion and rain. When the knock came, she froze. It was soft this time, hesitant. She walked to the door, pressing her ear against it. "Emily, please," came the voice she had tried not to remember. "I will leave if you ask. I just brought something you should have received years ago." She opened the door just a few inches, the chain still locked. Alexander stood there, rain-soaked, holding a manila envelope. His hair clung to his forehead, and his expression was unreadable. "What is that?" she asked quietly. "Your final paycheck," he said, his tone gentle, "and the maternity coverage you were denied. I made sure it is processed retroactively. You deserved that much." Emily stared, her breath catching. "You came all the way here for that." "I came because I cannot stop thinking about what I took from you," he said. "And because I need to know if he is—" "Do not," she interrupted sharply, her voice shaking. "Do not finish that sentence." The sound of Noah stirring behind her broke the silence. Alexander's eyes flicked past her shoulder for a brief second before she blocked his view. "Please leave," she whispered. He nodded slowly, setting the envelope down on the floor outside the door. "I will not bother you again," he said softly, his voice heavy with something she could not name. When he turned and walked away, she closed the door and slid down against it, tears spilling over. Through the wood, she could hear his fading footsteps mixing with the sound of the rain. She picked up the envelope with trembling hands and pressed it to her chest. In another world, maybe things could have been different. But in this one, the truth was, a storm neither of them was ready to face. Outside, Alexander reached the car and paused before getting in. His driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Are you all right, sir?" Alexander looked back toward the building, the faint light in her apartment window. "No," he said quietly, "but maybe someday I will be." The following morning, sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled into Emily's apartment, washing over the envelope still resting on the kitchen counter. She had not opened it. Every time she looked at it, something inside her twisted. Part of her wanted to tear it apart and throw it away. Another part, the quieter, heavier part, wanted to know what was inside. Not for the money, but for closure. Noah babbled softly in his crib, his laughter bouncing through the room. Emily smiled faintly. "You have no idea what kind of world you were born into, little one," she whispered. Her voice was warm, but her eyes were tired. She picked up the envelope and ran her fingers along its sealed edge. Inside, she could feel the weight of papers. A check, perhaps, and something else, maybe a note. She hesitated for a long moment before placing it back down. She was not ready. Across the city, Alexander sat in a meeting he was not really hearing. His assistant droned on about quarterly reports and new client contracts, but his thoughts drifted back to the night before the look in Emily's eyes when she told him not to finish his sentence. There had been pain there, yes, but also fear. Fear of losing something, or perhaps someone. He excused himself from the meeting and walked to his private office. The rain had cleared, leaving the skyline sharp against the morning light. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone, staring at her name on the screen. He wanted to call, but what would he even say? "I think your son might be mine." The words felt impossible. Instead, he typed a message and deleted it twice before sending. "I left something for you because you deserved it. Nothing more. I hope you are doing well." Then he set the phone down and walked away. Hours later, Emily finally tore the envelope open. A check fluttered out, along with a letter in his handwriting. She unfolded it slowly, reading in silence. "Emily, I do not expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I see now what I should have seen then. I do not want to make things harder for you. If you ever need help, for any reason, you can reach me. No questions asked." She stared at the words, her chest tight. For years, she had imagined what he might say if he ever found out. But now that the moment had come, it felt surreal, almost cruel. She put the letter away, but that night she found herself reading it again before bed. 2 days passed. Life settled back into its rhythm feedings, diaper changes, quick walks to the park. But the world had shifted in small, invisible ways. Alexander had become a ghost in her mind, a question she could not silence. She tried to forget him, but fate had a way of refusing to stay buried. That Thursday, while running errands, Emily stopped by a pediatric clinic for Noah's routine checkup. As she waited in the lobby, she caught sight of a familiar figure through the glass wall of the next room. Alexander was there, speaking quietly with the clinic's director. Her breath caught in her throat. What was he doing here? Panic surged. She gathered Noah's bag, ready to slip out unseen, but the nurse called her name. "Miss Parker, you are next." It was too late. Alexander turned at the sound, surprise flashing across his face when he saw her. He hesitated for a second before stepping closer. "You come here often?" he asked, his voice gentle. "It is Noah's checkup," she said quickly. "Please do not make a scene." "I am not," he said softly. "I was here for a donation meeting. I did not expect—" He stopped when Noah laughed, reaching out toward him with open hands. Emily froze. Alexander looked down at the child, his expression breaking for the briefest moment, the calm mask slipping into something raw and wordless. "He has your eyes," he said without thinking. Emily's heart pounded. "You should go," she whispered. "Please." But he could not move. Every instinct told him the truth was standing right in front of him. Still, he nodded, stepping back. "All right," he said quietly. "But this is not goodbye, Emily. You know that, do you not?" She looked away, tears stinging her eyes. As he left, she held Noah close, whispering, "You will always be safe, no matter what happens." Yet deep inside, she knew nothing about this moment was safe. The past had already begun to unravel, and the truth, whatever it was coming for both of them. Emily spent the night after the clinic visit pacing the small apartment, unable to calm the thoughts colliding inside her head. Noah slept peacefully in his crib, unaware of the storm that had begun outside his tiny world. She kept replaying the look on Alexander's face when he saw them, the quiet awe mixed with confusion, almost fear. She had known this day would come eventually, but not like this, not in a fluorescent-lit waiting room with strangers watching. The truth had been hiding in plain sight, and now it had found its voice. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee. Every corner of the room seemed to hum with tension. Should she run again, change her number, move apartments, disappear before he asked questions she could not answer? Her phone buzzed on the table, and her heart jumped. It was a message from an unknown number. She did not have to open it to know who it was. Still, she did. "I did not mean to frighten you today. I only came to help the clinic. Please, let me know you are all right." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was anything but. She typed 3 times and deleted each reply before tossing the phone aside. Across the river, Alexander sat in his office, the city skyline glinting like 1,000 tiny mirrors behind him. He could still feel the warmth of that little boy's hand on his sleeve, the way Noah had smiled at him as if they already knew each other. That single look had undone him more than any confession could. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at his reflection in it, whispering under his breath, "If he is mine, then I have already lost 3 years of his life." His assistant, Claire, knocked softly and stepped in. "Sir, there is an issue with the charity event next week. They are asking if you want to include the children's hospital you visited today." He nodded absent-mindedly, but she did not leave. "Is everything all right?" she asked carefully. "No," he admitted, surprising even himself. "But I intend to make it right." The next day, Emily received a call from the clinic. The receptionist said the CEO of Meridian Technologies had covered the full cost of Noah's medical checkups for the next year. Her heart clenched. She wanted to reject it, to prove she did not need his help, but she could not afford that kind of pride. "Thank you," she whispered, though the woman on the other end had already hung up. That evening, she took Noah for a walk through the park. The autumn leaves had turned to gold, swirling around their feet as the wind picked up. She sat on a bench near the pond, pulling the baby closer under his small blanket. "We are fine, right?" she said softly, brushing a curl from his forehead. "We do not need anyone else." But even as she said it, her eyes filled with tears. A shadow fell across the bench, and she looked up. Alexander stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets. "I am sorry," he said before she could speak. "I did not follow you. I just come here sometimes when I need to think." She wanted to tell him to leave, but her voice would not come. He stepped closer, his expression calm but earnest. "I do not want to make things harder for you. I just need to understand." "There is nothing to understand," she said quietly. "You had your life, and I built mine. That should be enough." He nodded slowly. "It would be, if I could stop wondering." She looked away, blinking back tears. "You cannot fix this with money or apologies. The past is not something you can buy back." "I know," he said softly, "but I can face it." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of leaves. Then Noah stirred, his small hand reaching toward Alexander again. The man froze, his composure faltering. "He likes you," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Alexander swallowed hard. "It feels like I have known him forever." The wind carried their words away, leaving behind only the sound of the child's quiet breathing and the weight of everything neither of them was ready to admit. The evening air grew colder as the last of the sunlight disappeared behind the buildings. Emily sat motionless on the park bench, her arms wrapped protectively around Noah. Alexander stood a few feet away, his eyes fixed on them as though afraid that if he blinked, they might vanish. The silence between them had stretched long enough to feel like a confession. Emily finally stood, adjusting the baby's blanket, trying to end the conversation that should never have started. "You need to stop coming around," she said softly. "This is not good for either of us." Alexander's voice was calm but weighted. "Tell me why, Emily. If I am imagining this, if what I feel is wrong, tell me I am mistaken, and I will walk away." Her breath hitched, and she looked down at the baby's small face, peaceful and unaware of the chaos surrounding him. "You do not understand," she whispered. "You live in a world that would destroy mine." "You think I would ever hurt you or him?" he asked, stepping closer. She shook her head. "No, but your world would. The attention, the questions, the people who would see him as a story, not a child. I cannot let that happen." His eyes softened. "Then let me protect you both." "Protect me," she repeated, almost laughing, but there was no humor in her voice. "You protected your company's reputation when you fired me for being pregnant. That was your idea of protection." The words hit him like a slap. His shoulders stiffened. "I did not know," he said quietly. "You did not ask," she replied. The truth hung in the air, sharp and heavy. For a long time, neither spoke. Noah stirred in her arms, his small hand brushing against her chin. Emily kissed his fingers, her heart aching. Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "Then let me ask now," he said. "Is he mine?" The question came out in a whisper, but it cut through the night like thunder. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She looked away, her throat tight. What difference would it make? "Every difference," he said firmly. "You think I would walk away if I knew he was my son? You think I could?" She turned back to him, her eyes fierce. "You think I wanted to do this alone? You think I did not cry myself to sleep for months? But when you left that letter on my desk, when your assistant told me to clear my things, I realized what kind of man you were. I was not going to beg for a place in your life." Alexander's expression broke completely. The truth she had buried had found its way out at last, raw and undeniable. "Emily," he said, his voice shaking, "I made a mistake. I made the worst mistake of my life." "Yes," she whispered, "and now you have to live with it." She turned to leave, but he caught himself before reaching for her, his hand falling helplessly to his side. "Please," he said softly, "at least tell me his name again." She hesitated. "Noah," she said finally, and then she walked away into the darkening park. Alexander stood there long after they were gone, the sound of the baby's name echoing in his chest like a heartbeat he had forgotten. Later that night, back in his penthouse, he poured himself a glass of water but could not drink. Every part of his life, the empire, the boardroom, the accolades felt meaningless compared to what he had just lost. He walked to the window, watching the city lights blur beneath a sheen of rain. His reflection stared back, hollow and unrecognizable. "Noah," he whispered to himself, the name trembling in his throat. Across Brooklyn, Emily sat beside her sleeping son, brushing a hand over his hair. The tears she had held back all day finally spilled. She wanted to believe she had done the right thing, keeping him safe, keeping their life simple. But deep down, she could not shake the feeling that truth, once spoken, had already begun to change everything. Fate, she knew, was not done with them yet. The following week passed in a haze neither of them could escape. Emily tried to focus on work, on diapers, on feeding schedules, but every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice asking, "Is he mine?" The question echoed through her like a ghost that refused to rest. She had given her answer in silence, but silence had never been enough for Alexander Carter. Across the city, he buried himself in meetings and business dinners, but nothing could quiet the storm that had started inside him. He had built his life on logic, precision, control, but this was chaos with a heartbeat. He could still see Noah's small hands, the way he had laughed without fear. It was as if fate had handed him a mirror to everything he had lost without ever realizing it. By Thursday, Alexander made a decision. He called his legal advisor, a gray-haired man who had worked with his family for years. "I need a private paternity test," he said. The lawyer hesitated. "Sir, may I ask whose?" Alexander's tone was calm but distant. "Mine." He hung up before the man could ask more. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at Emily's door. It was small, sealed, and bore no name except hers. Inside was a short note written in Alexander's careful handwriting. "Please forgive me for this. I need to know the truth, not for me, but for him. Tucked beneath it was a simple DNA testing kit. Emily felt her stomach drop. She sank into the nearest chair, her hands shaking. The weight of everything, the years, the fear, the secret pressed down all at once. She could not breathe. That night, after putting Noah to bed, she sat at the table staring at the small white box. A part of her wanted to throw it away, to end this madness before it went too far. But another part, the one that still remembered the girl she had been before life broke her, wanted peace. For 3 years she had lived in half-truths, carrying both love and resentment in the same breath. Maybe it was time to stop running. The next morning, she drove across the city to a quiet lab tucked between a pharmacy and a coffee shop. The receptionist looked up. "Name? Emily Parker," she said softly. "I am here for a private appointment." Her voice barely carried over the sound of the humming refrigerator behind the counter. Within minutes, the test was done, quick and clinical. She left the building feeling lighter and heavier all at once. Meanwhile, Alexander waited, each day blurring into the next. When the results arrived 3 days later, he opened them alone in his office. The words blurred for a second before his brain processed them. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. He exhaled shakily, the paper trembling in his hand. For the first time in years, tears filled his eyes. He pressed his palms against the desk, his mind spinning. There was no going back now. He had a son. He had missed his first word, his first laugh, his first steps, and all of it because of his own blindness. He picked up his phone and dialed Emily's number, but stopped before pressing call. She had protected that child for a reason. Barging into her life again might only make things worse. He set the phone down and whispered to the empty room, "I will do this right." That evening, as the city glowed beneath a light drizzle, Emily's phone vibrated with a new message. "You do not have to reply," the message read. "I just wanted you to know that I know. I will not take anything from you. I only want to be part of what is already yours." Emily stared at the screen for a long time, her throat tight. She typed one sentence and sent it before she could stop herself. "Then prove it." Miles away, Alexander read her words and smiled faintly. It was not forgiveness. It was a chance. And sometimes that was more powerful than anything else fate could offer. The next few days unfolded like a slow exhale after years of holding one's breath. Emily kept reading the message over and over again, the words looping in her head like a quiet promise. "Then prove it." It was not anger this time. It was a test. She wanted to believe him, to see if the man who had built empires could also build something fragile and human, a bridge between the past and the present. Alexander did not call again, but his actions began to speak louder than any apology could. 2 mornings later, the community center near Emily's apartment received an anonymous donation for their single-parent program. The director called her to share the news. "Someone covered a full year of childcare support," she said. The donor requested it be used for a family with a baby named Noah. Emily's hand froze on the phone. She knew exactly who it was. Her instinct was to reject it, but this time she did not. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular, as if the city itself could hear her. Alexander, on the other hand, had started keeping a small routine of his own. Every evening, after leaving the office, he parked a few blocks from the park where Emily often walked with Noah. He never approached them, never interrupted, just watched from a distance. He saw her laughter when the boy tried to chase pigeons, the way she knelt to wipe his hands, the quiet joy of ordinary life that no amount of wealth could buy. For the first time, Alexander Carter envied something he could not own. One afternoon, fate intervened. As Emily pushed Noah's stroller along the path, a sudden gust of wind blew his blanket into the pond. Without thinking, a man nearby ran forward, catching it before it could sink. When he handed it back, she looked up and froze. Alexander stood there, soaked from the water's edge, holding the small blanket like a fragile truce. "You are everywhere," she said softly, but this time there was no bitterness, only exhaustion. "Only where I need to be," he replied, his voice quiet but steady. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "You said you wanted to prove it. Words are easy, Alexander. The truth is not." "Then tell me how," he said. "Tell me what it would take." "Time," she whispered, "and patience, both things I am not sure you understand." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it is time I learn." Over the next few weeks, their lives began to shift in small, cautious ways. Alexander visited the park occasionally, always with permission, sometimes bringing a new toy for Noah or a book Emily could read to him. He never pushed, never demanded. Instead, he listened to her stories about sleepless nights, about working double shifts, about the quiet fear of raising a child alone. And for the first time, she saw something new in his eyes, not pity, not guilt, but respect. One chilly evening, Emily sat on a bench as Noah fell asleep in his stroller. Alexander sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. The city lights reflected in the pond, turning the water to liquid gold. "You were right," he said after a long pause. "Money fixes things, but it does not heal people." She turned to look at him, her voice soft but certain. "Healing takes truth, and truth takes courage." He nodded, staring at the sleeping child. "Then maybe that is what I am learning now." Emily studied him quietly. He looked different somehow, not like the man from the newspapers, but someone stripped of the armor success had built. For the first time, she felt the wall between them shift. Not gone, but beginning to crack. She whispered, "Do not promise me the world, Alexander. Just show up when it matters." He met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "I will." As they sat in silence, the wind carried the faint sound of laughter from a nearby playground, the kind of laughter that made even the hardest hearts remember what hope felt like. The days began to blend into a rhythm that neither of them had expected. It was not a relationship, not yet, but something fragile and real, taking shape in the spaces between silence and understanding. Emily no longer flinched when she saw Alexander near the park, and he no longer felt the need to prove himself through grand gestures. Instead, there were quiet exchanges, a shared smile, a brief conversation about Noah's new word, a passing cup of coffee handed without a word. Life, somehow, had begun to soften its edges. One Saturday morning, Emily found herself at a small farmer's market near the edge of Prospect Park. She was comparing prices on fresh apples when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "I never imagined you would be an early riser," Alexander said, his tone light but warm. She turned, startled but not surprised. "Motherhood does not give much choice," she replied, lifting the corner of her mouth in a half-smile. He reached for a basket of pears. "May I walk with you?" She hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. The crowd moved around them, a blur of voices and colors, but their steps fell into an easy rhythm. For the first time in years, it felt almost normal. When Noah began fussing, Alexander crouched down instinctively, his movements gentle and unsure, but genuine. "Hey there, little man," he said softly, his hand steadying the stroller. The baby blinked at him before letting out a giggle. Emily watched, her heart catching in her chest. There was something disarming about seeing a man so powerful kneel down on a sidewalk just to make a child laugh. "He likes you," she said quietly. Alexander looked up, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Later that afternoon, Emily sat at her kitchen table, replaying the scene in her mind. The way Alexander had carried the groceries to her car, the way he had waited until she was safely home before driving off. There had been no expectations, no questions, just presence, and that, more than anything, began to undo her walls. But the world had a way of reminding them that peace was never simple. The next morning, an article appeared in a business magazine. Alexander Carter spotted with unknown woman and child. The photo was grainy but clear enough to recognize them. Emily's phone began buzzing before she even finished reading. A co-worker texted, asking if the rumors were true. Her hands trembled. She felt sick. Before she could react, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Alexander standing there, holding a copy of the same magazine. His face was tight with guilt. "I am so sorry," he said. "I swear I did not leak this. I thought no one noticed us." "They always notice you," she said bitterly, clutching the magazine. "This is exactly why I wanted to keep my life separate." "I will fix it," he promised. "You cannot fix gossip, Alexander. You cannot erase it with money." Her voice cracked. "This is my life, my child. I cannot let him grow up being a headline." He stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "You are right, but I will not let this hurt you. I will speak to my PR team. We will release a statement, something respectful." She shook her head, tears welling up. "No, you will not say a word. Silence is the only way this dies." For a long moment, neither moved. Finally, he whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you. You already did," she said softly. But this time, not with anger, with truth. When he left, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. Emily stood by the window, holding Noah close as the city lights flickered below. Somewhere in the distance, she could see the reflection of their two worlds colliding again, the powerful man who once broke her, and the woman who had learned to live without him. But even now, she could not deny it, the lines between those worlds were fading faster than she could draw new ones. The article spread faster than either of them could have imagined. By Monday morning, it was everywhere on business blogs, gossip sites, and social media feeds. People speculated endlessly about who the woman was, what the story behind the child could be, and how the mysterious CEO had been hiding a secret family. Emily stopped answering her phone. Even her co-workers had begun to whisper behind her back. Every time she walked into the office, she could feel their eyes on her. She wanted to scream that it was all a misunderstanding, but she knew that would only feed the fire. Instead, she quit. She packed her things quietly, leaving a resignation letter on her desk. Across town, Alexander stood in his glass office, staring at a dozen missed calls from his PR department. His legal advisor had warned him that silence could be seen as an admission. But Alexander did not care about public image anymore. He cared about Emily. He called her over and over again, but she never answered. Finally, he drove to her apartment, only to find the door locked and the curtains drawn. The neighbor told him she had moved out that morning. "Did she say where?" he asked, his voice raw. The woman shook her head, only that she needed a fresh start. For the first time in his life, Alexander Carter felt powerless. He had built companies, bought skyscrapers, and rewritten markets. But he could not undo this. Not with money, not with words. For the next week, he searched for her quietly, reaching out to every contact he trusted. Then, one rainy afternoon, his assistant Claire handed him a small envelope. "This came to the office," she said. There was no return address, just his name in delicate handwriting. Inside was a single photo, Emily and Noah at a playground. The picture had been taken from a distance, but both were smiling. On the back, in her handwriting, were 6 words. "We are safe. Please let us be." Alexander sat in silence for a long time, his thumb brushing over the photograph, as if he could touch the happiness he had once destroyed. That night, he poured himself a glass of whiskey he did not drink and stared at the city outside. He thought of every choice that had led him here, every moment he could have done something different. And then, for the first time, he did nothing. He let her go. Months passed. Winter came, painting the city in silver and white. Alexander threw himself into work, but the fire that used to drive him had dimmed. He began to spend more time at the children's hospital his company funded, reading to the kids, fixing broken toys, finding pieces of himself he had long forgotten. The staff whispered about how much he had changed, how the once ruthless businessman had become strangely gentle. Meanwhile, in a small town 2 hours north, Emily found a modest apartment overlooking the Hudson River. It was quiet there. Noah had space to run, to grow, to live without fear. She took freelance accounting jobs, just enough to pay the bills, and spent her evenings watching her son chase fireflies in the snowlight. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Yet some nights, when the wind howled against the windows, she would think of Alexander, of his voice, his eyes, his regret, and wonder if fate had already decided they were bound to cross again. Because destiny, she had learned, was not always a straight line. It curved, it twisted, it waited. And somewhere, far from her small apartment, a man sat alone in a glass tower, holding a worn photograph and whispering a name that still meant home. Spring arrived quietly that year, soft and reluctant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The snow melted into small rivers that ran along the curbs, and the grey sky began to open into the color of forgiveness. In the small town by the Hudson River, Emily stood by the window of her apartment, watching Noah chase the last patches of snow in the yard. He was growing fast, all curiosity and laughter, the kind of joy that reminded her that life could still be kind. She had learned to live simply, to build peace from ordinary days, but some nights she still dreamed of a man she had loved and lost in the same lifetime. She told herself those dreams did not matter anymore, but fate, as it often does, had other plans. One afternoon, while she was walking home from the grocery store, Noah running ahead with a small paper kite, She noticed a car parked across the street. It was not the kind of car that belonged in their quiet town. A man stepped out, tall and familiar, but older somehow, gentler. Alexander stood beside the car, his hands in his pockets, unsure whether to smile or apologize first. Emily froze where she stood, the grocery bag slipping slightly in her hand. Noah turned, his kite string tangling around his fingers, and pointed. "Mommy, it is the man from the park," he said, his voice bright. Alexander's chest tightened at the sound of it. Emily swallowed hard, steadying herself before walking closer. "You found us," she said quietly. He nodded. "Not to take anything away," he said, "just to see if you are all right." She studied him for a long moment. He looked different, not in his clothes or his face, but in his eyes. The sharpness that used to live there had softened. "We are," she said finally. "We are doing fine." He smiled faintly. "I can see that." There was a pause, the kind of silence that holds too many memories. Then he said, "I have been volunteering at the children's hospital. They asked if I could help organize a fundraiser here next month. I thought, maybe, if you are comfortable, I could visit." "Visit?" she repeated. "For Noah," he said. "Only if you say yes." She looked at her son, who was busy trying to fly his paper kite again, his laughter echoing through the open air. Then she looked back at Alexander and saw something she had not seen before. Not guilt, not pride, but hope. "You can stay for dinner," she said softly. His breath caught, just for a second, before he nodded. That evening, for the first time in years, the three of them sat around a small table. The meal was simple: soup, bread, and laughter. Alexander listened to Noah's endless stories, the kind that only children could tell with such conviction. Emily watched them, her heart a strange mixture of warmth and ache. When the boy finally fell asleep on the couch, Alexander stood to leave. "Thank you," he said, "for this." "It was just dinner," she replied, but her voice trembled. "No," he said, smiling faintly. "It was a beginning." He walked to the door, hesitated, then added, "If he ever asks about me, tell him I was late but I came." When the door closed behind him, Emily leaned against the wall, tears filling her eyes. She looked over at her sleeping son and whispered, "He came." Months later, on a warm June morning, the park near the river was filled with people attending the hospital fundraiser. Among the volunteers stood Alexander and Emily, side by side, watching Noah play among the other children. It was not a fairy tale ending, but something better, a quiet redemption. Sometimes, the past does not need to be erased to make peace with it. Sometimes, love simply learns how to start again. And as the sun dipped behind the river, Alexander reached for Emily's hand, not to claim it, but to hold it, just long enough to remind her and himself that forgiveness was not weakness. It was the strongest thing either of them had ever known. In this emotional and cinematic tale of love, regret, and redemption, a single mother's quiet life collides once again with the man who unknowingly broke her heart and changed her destiny. This deeply moving story captures how fate intertwines two broken souls who must learn that forgiveness is stronger than pride. Inspired by the power and humanity found in millionaire stories, it reveals the fragile beauty that lies beneath wealth, ambition, and the choices that shape who we become. Through loss, discovery, and second chances, this narrative explores how, even in a world driven by power, compassion can rewrite the ending. If you love heartfelt millionaire stories that show the human side of success and the healing force of love, this is for you. As their paths cross through pain and hope, the story becomes one of the most touching millionaire stories about rediscovering what truly matters: family, truth, and emotional courage. Crafted with realism, moral depth, and cinematic emotion, it belongs among those rare millionaire stories that remind us that power without love is empty, and that redemption often begins with a single act of kindness.